5 years of marriage had taught me that difficult conversations rarely began with difficult words. They began with unusual silence. Emily came home nearly an hour later than usual that Tuesday evening. She set her keys on the kitchen counter but didn't remove her coat. Normally, she would kiss me hello, ask how my day had gone, and laugh about something that had happened at the military base. Tonight, she stood staring out the dining room window. "I need to ask you something." The seriousness in her voice made me put down the engineering plans I had been reviewing. "Of course." She sat across from me at the table, but avoided meeting my eyes. "I've been helping someone." I waited. She took a slow breath. Daniel Brooks. The name felt familiar. Then I remembered. Her former boyfriend from university. The relationship had ended years before I met her. She rarely mentioned him, and when she did, it was only in passing. "What happened?" Her expression softened. "There was a terrible accident." She clasped her hands tightly together. "Daniel's sister and her husband were killed in a highway collision 2 months ago. They left behind a 6-month-old daughter." I felt my heart sink. "That's awful." "It is." He became her legal guardian almost overnight. Emily nodded. "He's trying his best." But he wasn't prepared to raise a baby alone. She finally looked at me. "I've been helping him." I nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She seemed surprised by my reaction. "It does. Of course. Losing family like that would change anyone's life." For the first time that evening, some of the tension left her shoulders. "Thank you." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I was afraid you'd misunderstand. I don't think helping someone in an emergency is wrong." Relief spread across her face. "There's something else." I waited quietly. She hesitated. "Daniel found temporary work, but his apartment isn't suitable for a baby. So," she swallowed nervously, "I was wondering if we could let his niece stay with us for a little while, just until he gets back on his feet." The request caught me off guard. Not because caring for a child was unreasonable, because it would fundamentally change our daily lives. I thought carefully before answering. "How long is a little while?" "I'm not sure. A few months. Maybe longer." I leaned back in my chair. "This isn't a small decision. I know. We need to discuss routines, legal responsibilities, childcare. I know. And Dana would obviously need to be involved." She nodded after every point. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was still manageable, until I asked one simple question. "How have you been helping him so far?" Emily looked away. "I've covered some expenses." "What kind of expenses?" "Rent, baby supplies, medical appointments." I nodded. "How much?" She hesitated. "Emily, about..." She barely whispered the number. $80,000. The room suddenly felt much quieter. $80,000. She nodded. "Over the last 2 months." I tried to process what I had just heard. Where did that money come from? Another long silence. Finally, she answered. "Our family investment account." I stared at her. "The joint account?" "Yes." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Not because she had helped someone in need, but because I had never known. Not once had she mentioned transferring that much money. Not once had she asked whether we should make such a significant financial decision together. For the first time that evening, I realized the conversation wasn't really about Daniel or the baby. It was about everything that had happened without my knowledge. That I looked at Emily for several long seconds. She seemed to understand exactly why I had gone quiet. "I was going to tell you." "When?" She didn't answer immediately. "I don't know. When things settled down." I nodded slowly. "So after the money was already gone." "It was an emergency." I didn't think there was time to debate it. I folded my hands on the table, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm not asking why you wanted to help. I'm asking why you believed you had to hide it." She sighed. "I knew you'd have questions." "Of course I would. It's our investment account. We built it together. Over 5 years of marriage, we had agreed on one simple financial principle. Everyday expenses could be handled independently. Major financial decisions would always be discussed first. Not because either of us wanted control, because partnership requires transparency. $80,000 isn't groceries. It isn't replacing a broken washing machine. It's a major financial commitment. Emily rubbed her forehead. "I wasn't trying to betray you. I was trying to help someone before it was too late." I believe you. And if you'd come to me first. I paused. I might have agreed. She looked up. You would have. I don't know. But we would have decided together. The distinction mattered. Not because of the money. Because of the trust. She leaned forward. Daniel had no one else. And now he's asking if his niece can stay here. I couldn't tell him no. You shouldn't have answered at all. She frowned. What do you mean? You should have told him you needed to speak with your husband first. She looked frustrated. I knew this would become complicated. It became complicated the moment you made promises that involved both of us. Silence settled over the room again. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us insulted the other. Yet the distance between us felt greater than it ever had before. Finally, I stood and walked into my home office. Emily followed a few moments later. What are you doing? I logged into our investment management system. I'm temporarily suspending withdrawals from the joint account. Her expression changed instantly. You can't be serious. I am. She stared at the screen as I completed the authorization. I'm not closing the account. I'm not taking your personal savings. I'm simply pausing access until we review every transaction together. She folded her arms. So you don't trust me? I turned toward her. This isn't about punishment. It's about understanding what happened. There may be receipts, agreements, future financial commitments I don't even know exist. We need a complete picture. Her voice became sharper. Daniel needs help now, and we'll discuss how to provide it responsibly. You froze the account. I paused new withdrawals. There's a difference. She shook her head in disbelief. You're acting like an auditor instead of a husband. And you're asking me to act like a stranger instead of a partner. The words hung between us. For the first time since we had married, neither of us knew how to bridge the silence. Emily picked up her phone and walked toward the front door. Where are you going? I need some air. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, she said quietly, I never thought you'd be this cold-hearted. The front door closed behind her. I remained standing in the office, listening to the silence that followed. Cold-hearted. The words echoed in my mind. If I had refused to help a grieving family, perhaps the accusation would have been fair. But I hadn't refused. I hadn't even reached a decision. All I had asked for was honesty. I looked again at the transaction history filling my computer screen. Dozens of transfers, different amounts, multiple dates, each one made without a single conversation between us. At that moment, I understood something painful. Money had never been the true problem. Money could be earned again. Investments could recover. What frightened me was something far more difficult to rebuild. Trust. Because marriages rarely break under the weight of one impossible request. They begin to fracture when two people stop believing they owe each other the truth. Emily didn't come home until after midnight. Neither of us tried to continue the conversation. There was nothing either of us could say while emotions were still running high. The next morning, I called our financial advisor. Not because I believed Emily had stolen from us. I knew exactly where she said the money had gone. But after discovering months of undisclosed transfers, I no longer knew the full picture. I'd like a complete review of every transaction from our family investment account over the past year, I told him. Of course, I'll have everything prepared. Later that afternoon, I met with our accountant and legal advisor at their office. Spread across the conference table were bank statements, investment summaries, transfer records, and authorization logs. None of it looked dramatic. No hidden accounts. No suspicious companies. No missing money. What unsettled me was something much simpler. A pattern. Our accountant slid a folder toward me. The transfers began about 7 months ago. I opened it. The first payment had been relatively small, $5,000. The transaction description read, emergency assistance. A week later came another transfer, then another. Some covered rent. Others were labeled childcare expenses, medical bills, groceries, or legal paperwork connected to Daniel becoming the child's guardian. Individually, none of the payments seemed unreasonable. Together, they painted a very different picture. My legal advisor pointed toward the dates. Notice something? I studied the timeline. Almost every transfer coincided with an explanation Emily had given me. Business travel, military training exercises, unexpected work expenses, charity fundraising events. The explanations weren't completely false. Many of those events had happened. but they had also provided convenient reasons for financial activity I never questioned. Our accountant spoke carefully. We're not suggesting fraud. Every dollar appears to have gone exactly where your wife intended. I understand. What concerns me is disclosure. He nodded. That's the issue we noticed as well. Over 7 months, Emily had quietly built an entirely separate financial commitment without ever inviting me into the conversation. Not once. I closed the folder. Can you prepare a complete timeline? Every transfer, every date, and the supporting documentation. Certainly, by early evening, the report stretched across dozens of pages. Nothing had been hidden from a bank. Only from me. Driving home, I kept replaying the previous evening's conversation. Would I have agreed to help? Probably. Would I have wanted to meet Daniel first? Absolutely. Would I have expected us to decide together how much support our family could realistically provide? Without question, the secrecy had stolen that opportunity from both of us. When I arrived home, Emily sat quietly on the back patio. She looked exhausted. I spoke with Daniel today, she said before I could. How is he? Overwhelmed. I can imagine. She looked at me hopefully. Does this mean you're ready to reconsider? I spent the day reviewing our financial records. Her expression immediately changed. You actually hired professionals? I asked them to organize the facts. So now I'm under investigation? No, we're under examination. She frowned. I don't see the difference. The purpose isn't to accuse anyone. It's to understand everything that happened before we make another important decision. She looked away toward the garden. I never wanted this to become so complicated. I answered quietly. It became complicated long before yesterday. It became complicated the first time you decided honesty could wait. 2 evenings later, we gathered in the dining room. Emily sat across from me, her parents beside her. My older brother, Michael, attended at my request, along with our accountant and legal advisor. I wanted everyone to hear the same information at the same time. No assumptions, no rumors, just facts. The accountant placed a printed report in front of each person. This document summarizes every transfer made from the Carter family investment account during the past 7 months. Emily lowered her eyes. I began calmly. I asked for this review because I discovered significant financial activity I hadn't known about. I didn't ask for it because I believed money had been stolen. I asked because partnership depends on transparency. No one interrupted. The accountant projected a timeline onto the television screen. One by one, the transfers appeared. Dates, amounts, supporting documents, purpose. The total steadily increased until it reached the final figure. $80,000. Emily's father leaned forward. I had no idea it was this much. Emily whispered, neither did I. The accountant nodded. Large commitments often begin with small decisions. The first payment was modest. But because there was never a conversation about long-term expectations, the assistance continued to grow. The legal advisor then pointed to another column. These notes compare the transfer dates with explanations given to Mr. Carter regarding the withdrawals. Emily slowly looked up. Business travel, training exercises, unexpected work expenses. Each explanation had contained some truth, yet none had included the whole truth. The room remained silent. Finally, I spoke. I want everyone to understand something clearly. I looked directly at Emily's parents. I'm not criticizing Emily for helping a grieving father and an innocent child. If someone needed emergency support, I would have wanted us to help. Emily stared at me. You would have. Yes. But I also would have wanted us to make that decision together. I placed my hand gently on the report. This timeline isn't about generosity. It's about communication. Emily's mother reached across the table and quietly held her daughter's hand. Hiding difficult conversations rarely makes them easier. Emily nodded slowly. I know. Tears formed in her eyes. I kept telling myself I'd explain everything once Daniel's situation became more stable. She looked at me. Then another emergency happened. And another. I thought I was protecting everyone from more stress. I answered gently. Instead, you carried the burden alone, and you left me wondering why my own wife didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. Her shoulders slumped. I wasn't trying to shut you out, but I did. For the first time since our argument began, She wasn't defending her decisions. She was examining them honestly. "I see it now," she said quietly. "I thought asking for forgiveness afterward would be easier than asking for help beforehand." She gave a sad smile. "I was wrong." The legal advisor closed his folder. "In my experience, financial disagreements rarely begin with numbers. They usually begin with silence." Everyone around the table reflected on those words. I looked at Emily. "I still don't know what our future looks like. I'm not pretending trust can be repaired overnight. But this meeting wasn't about proving someone right. It was about making sure we finally understood what actually happened." She wiped away a tear. "I understand now. The money wasn't what hurt our marriage." "No, it wasn't." I met her eyes. "The secrecy did." She nodded without hesitation. "I wanted to avoid one difficult conversation. Instead, her voice broke. I created months of them. No one rushed to fill the silence. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with dramatic revelations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a timeline spread across a dining room table, showing that the greatest damage wasn't caused by generosity. It was caused by believing honesty could wait until later. And by then, trust had already begun to disappear. The weeks following our family meeting were the quietest of our marriage. There were no more arguments, no raised voices, no accusations, only long conversations that should have happened months earlier. Emily and I met several times with a marriage counselor, hoping that understanding the past might help us rebuild the future. The counselor listened carefully before asking us a simple question. "When did you first stop bringing difficult conversations to each other?" Neither of us answered immediately. Emily finally spoke. "I think it started when I convinced myself I had to solve every problem alone." I nodded, "And I stopped noticing that you were carrying burdens without letting me share them." The counselor smiled gently. "Those two habits often grow together." For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine that perhaps we could still find our way back. But every conversation led us to the same realization. The problem wasn't one decision. It was a pattern. Emily had begun protecting me from difficult truths. I had begun assuming openness no longer came naturally between us. Neither of us intended to hurt the other. Yet trust had quietly worn away, one unspoken conversation at a time. One evening, after another counseling session, we sat on a park bench overlooking the lake where we had once celebrated our first wedding anniversary. The water reflected the setting sun, calm and still. Emily looked toward the horizon. "I keep wishing I could go back." "So do I. I wouldn't hide anything." "I know." She turned toward me. "But knowing that now doesn't change what already happened." I shook my head. "No, it doesn't." She took a slow breath. "I've been asking myself whether love is enough. I already knew my answer. So have I." And I looked across the quiet lake. "I think love needs trust the way a house needs a foundation. You can still see the walls after the foundation cracks. But eventually, everything begins to lean." She closed her eyes briefly. "I understand." Several days later, we met at our attorney's office. There was no bitterness, no attempt to punish one another. We reviewed the divorce agreement carefully, discussing each detail with respect. The process felt less like a legal battle and more like acknowledging a truth neither of us could continue denying. Before we signed the final documents, Emily looked at me. "I'm sorry our story ended this way." I answered honestly. "So am I. But pretending we're still standing on solid ground won't rebuild what we've already lost." She nodded. "I know." We signed the papers in silence. When we stood to leave, she extended her hand. For a moment, I looked at it. Then I gently shook it, not because we had become strangers, but because we had chosen to part without becoming enemies. Outside the office, she smiled sadly. "I hope you find happiness." "I hope you do too." As we walked in opposite directions, I realized something unexpected. Ending a marriage peacefully still hurts. But sometimes kindness is the final act of love two people can offer each other when they know they can no longer continue together. Life slowly found a new rhythm. The quiet that once felt overwhelming gradually became peaceful. I poured my energy into expanding my financial consulting company, helping families and business owners create long-term investment plans built on transparency and trust. Ironically, the experience I had lived through changed the way I approach my work. Whenever couples met with me to discuss shared finances, I emphasized one principle above all others. Good financial planning begins with honest conversations. Numbers matter, but trust matters more. Many clients later told me those discussions strengthened their relationships long before they signed any investment documents. Meanwhile, Emily continued serving as a captain with the same dedication she had always shown. But outside of work, she made a conscious effort to rebuild her personal integrity in quieter ways. She attended counseling regularly. She volunteered with organizations that supported military families facing unexpected hardships. And whenever she spoke about difficult situations, she no longer tried to carry them alone. Instead, she asked for advice. She accepted support. She learned that strength and openness could exist together. Several months after our divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected email. It was from Daniel. He thanked me for treating him fairly throughout everything that had happened. He explained that he had recently accepted a permanent engineering position with a manufacturing company in another city. The steady income allowed him to rent a larger apartment and provide a stable home for his young niece. He ended the message with a sentence that stayed with me. I wish I'd known sooner how much my situation had affected your marriage. If I had, I would have insisted that Emily tell you everything from the beginning. I read the email twice before replying. I wished him and his daughter every success. None of what had happened had ever been the little girl's fault. She had simply needed a loving home. And now, thankfully, she had one. As another year passed, our lives continued moving forward. Occasionally, Emily and I crossed paths at community events or mutual friends gatherings. There was no awkwardness, no lingering resentment, only quiet respect for the paths we had chosen. One afternoon, after speaking at a financial literacy seminar, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. People often assume marriages ended because of dramatic betrayals or one terrible decision. Our story had been different. It had ended because difficult conversations were postponed until they became impossible to avoid. If honesty had come first, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Perhaps we would have disagreed. Perhaps we would have debated budgets, responsibilities, and practical solutions. But we would have faced those challenges together. Instead, silence created distance. Distance weakened trust. And once trust disappeared, love alone could no longer carry the weight of the relationship. Looking back, I no longer felt anger, only gratitude for the lessons we had all learned. Emily rebuilt her life with greater honesty. Daniel became the capable father his daughter needed. My own business grew stronger because I understood more deeply what partnership truly required. In the end, none of us were defined by our mistakes. We were defined by what we chose to learn from them. Because the greatest tragedies in relationships are not always caused by impossible requests or financial hardship. More often, they begin when people stop believing that the truth, even when uncomfortable, is something they can safely share with the person standing beside them. And sometimes, one honest conversation at the beginning can prevent years of misunderstanding, heartache, and regret. 2 years can change almost everything. The grief that once filled empty rooms slowly gave way to quiet purpose. The questions that had once kept me awake at night gradually found peaceful answers. Most importantly, I learned that moving forward does not mean forgetting the past. It means allowing the lessons from it to shape a better future. My investment consulting company had grown far beyond what I had imagined. What began as a small practice advising families on responsible financial planning had become one of the country's most respected investment firms, known for combining strong financial strategies with unwavering ethical standards. Every new employee attended the same orientation. Before discussing markets, portfolios, or investment models, we talked about trust. I always told them the same thing. Money follows confidence, but confidence follows integrity. If people can't trust your honesty, they'll never trust your advice. Those words became part of the company's culture. Clients often commented that our firm felt different, not because we promised extraordinary returns, because we promised complete transparency. Standing beside me through every stage of that growth was Sophia Bennett. We first met when she joined the firm as a senior financial analyst shortly after my divorce. From our earliest meetings, I admired the calm confidence she brought into every discussion. She challenged my ideas respectfully. She celebrated the team's successes without seeking attention. And when problems arose, she addressed them directly instead of allowing misunderstandings to grow. One evening, after a particularly demanding week preparing for a major client presentation, she noticed me still working long after everyone else had gone home. She walked into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this." I smiled. "You're becoming famous for perfect timing." She laughed. "I've heard that before." We reviewed the presentation together until nearly midnight. Whenever I became frustrated by a difficult problem, Sophia never rushed to solve it for me. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that helped me discover the answer myself. Working with her felt effortless, not because we never disagreed, because disagreements always led to better ideas rather than damaged relationships. Months later, after successfully completing one of the largest projects in our company's history, I invited her to dinner. She smiled knowingly. "Is this a business meeting?" "Only if you want it to be. And if I don't, then it's simply dinner with someone I'd like to know better." She laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Our friendship grew slowly. Neither of us carried unrealistic expectations. We simply enjoyed building something honest from the beginning. There were no hidden conversations, no unanswered questions, no promises made without discussion. Every important decision became something we shared. 1 year later, standing beneath a canopy of spring flowers, Sophia and I exchanged wedding vows surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues. When the officiant asked why we had chosen each other, Sophia answered before I could. "Because trust shouldn't have to be earned every morning. It should be protected every day." Those words remained with me long after the ceremony ended. They became part of our marriage just as surely as the rings we wore. Together, we continued growing both our family and our company, proving that the strongest partnerships are built not on avoiding difficult conversations, but on facing them honestly from the very beginning point. 2 years after my divorce from Emily, our paths crossed again under very different circumstances. We had both been invited to speak at a national conference on financial ethics and organizational accountability. The event brought together business leaders, military administrators, legal professionals, and financial experts to discuss the importance of transparency in both public service and private enterprise. As I reviewed my presentation backstage, I noticed Emily speaking with another group of attendees. She looked confident, but different from the woman I had once known. There was a quiet openness in the way she listened to others. No urgency to defend herself. No need to appear perfect. When our eyes met, she smiled warmly and walked over. "It's been a long time." "It has." She extended her hand, and I shook it with a genuine smile. "Congratulations," she said. "I've heard wonderful things about your company." "Thank you. I've also heard about your work." She had become a respected advocate for ethical leadership within military organizations, helping develop training programs that encouraged honest communication, responsible decision-making, and accountability among officers. The work suited her. She smiled. "I never imagined my hardest lessons would become the ones I shared with others. Sometimes those are the lessons people need most." She nodded thoughtfully. "I believe that now." A conference organizer approached to let us know the next session was about to begin. Before leaving, Emily looked at me one last time. "I'm glad we both found peace." "So am I. And I'm glad we didn't let the past define the rest of our lives." "Neither am I." With that, we walked towards separate conference rooms, not as former spouses carrying old resentment, but as 2 professionals who had learned different lessons from the same difficult chapter. Later that afternoon, I delivered my keynote presentation. Rather than focusing only on investment strategies, I spoke about the human side of financial decisions. Trust, I told the audience, is the most valuable asset any partnership can possess. It doesn't appear overnight. It grows one honest conversation at a time. And it can disappear the moment people begin believing that silence is easier than truth. The audience listened quietly. Many took notes. Some nodded in recognition. When the session ended, dozens of attendees approached to thank me. Several admitted they planned to have conversations with business partners or family members they had been postponing for months. If even one of those conversations prevented the misunderstandings that had once changed my own life, then sharing my story had been worthwhile. That evening, I returned home. Sophia greeted me at the front door with a smile, and our young son raced across the hallway before I even had time to set down my briefcase. "Did your speech go well?" she asked. "It did. And yours?" She laughed. "I think the audience survived my charts and spreadsheets." I never doubted they would. We shared dinner together, talking about our day, while our son eagerly described the birdhouse he had built that afternoon. Listening to their laughter, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not because life had been easy, but because it had taught me what truly deserved protecting. Looking around at the family we had built and the company that had grown from openness rather than appearances, I finally understood the lesson that had taken years to learn. Relationships rarely fail because people encounter difficult situations. Life will always bring hardship, uncertainty, and impossible choices. They fail when honesty quietly disappears from the conversations that matter most. Whether building a marriage, raising a family, leading a business, or earning another person's trust, the strongest foundations are never created in a single extraordinary moment. They are built one truthful decision at a time.